Afternoon, colleagues. May I call the meeting to order? We are properly quorumed. With those who are present, we have Minister Cattle online, Honorable Minister Cattle, and Member of Parliament, St. Philip North, Dr. Brown. Online, we have also Cassandra Harewood from the Office of the Auditor General. We're pleased to have Ministers Husbands, Jordan, and Cummins join us. So we're properly quorum. We want to resume the inquiry into the matters relative to the findings and recommendations and queries raised by the Auditor General in the 2020 report, specifically so related to the Poverty Alleviation Fund operations of urban and the rural commissions as well. The minutes of our last meeting to be deferred. We have a motion to that effect, please. And seconded, and all in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. Motion is carried. Ayes have it. Today we have to appear before us to give some answers to some of your questions. Mr. Russell Armstrong, firstly, who comes here as the Director of the Rural Development Commission, and some of those same questions that we were able to put to Ms. Director of the Urban Development Commission last week. We may want to, Ms. King, we may want to put to Mr. Russell Armstrong in his capacity as Director of the Rural Development Commission. Those questions have to do, of course, with contracts awarded and not properly verified in documentation. The Commission funds dispensed from the Poverty Eradication Program to the Commission, not perhaps fully used, but not returned to the Commission, and other matters of projects slated to have been completed, funded, but not verified as having been completed, etc. You know the turf, the area. We are going to have Mr. Armstrong to come first and offer his evidence before us, and then we will go to the two other persons who are here today in their capacity as employed with the Poverty Eradication Fund itself. I don't know of you, but I should tell you, I would want to hear from Mr. Armstrong. Why is it that on 2 occasions he's been asked to come here, he has not presented himself and has not given an explanation? Or I'd be interested in hearing that. I think we need to have that for the record. Good afternoon, Mr. Armstrong. Thank you for coming, Mr. Armstrong. Good afternoon to you. You would, of course, have to take an oath or make an affirmation. This is required under the regulations, the legislation.
Good afternoon, Mr. Armstrong.
Good afternoon.
Can I ask, would you prefer to take the oath of witness or affirmation of witness?
Well, really and truly, I don't know the difference, so I'm fine with either one.
Okay, whereas you take the oath, you stand, hold the Bible in your right hand.
Mm-hmm.
Stand, hold the Bible in the right hand, and read the oath of witness for us, please.
Where is it? Okay. The evidence that I shall give before the committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. You may sit.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. Could I have you state your name and position with the Rural Development Commission, just for the record?
Okay, Russell Christopher Armstrong, Director, Rural Development Commission.
And you've been doing that for how long?
Since April 2019.
Since April 2019. No, Mr. Armstrong, I've said to the committee, I have to ask of you, we summoned you here, what, 3 times? I think 2 of
Right.
those occasions you didn't show up, and you didn't provide us with an excuse and explanation as to your absence.
Okay, well,
Will you shed some light on it, just for the record?
yeah, certainly. The first time that I was summoned, I had COVID, and I had been in isolation for some time, so I didn't even know I was summoned. I only recognized when I returned to work. So that's the first time. I believe the second time would have been last week that I did not appear, and that was because I was summoned to a meeting with the Attorney General at the last minute, and I was in that meeting until well after 4.
All right. You could alternatively have said to the Attorney General, I am already invited to and expected to attend the meeting of the Parliamentary Committee, and therefore I'm not available.
That is
could
noted.
be an option.
That is noted.
All right. I'm glad you're over your COVID. Trust that you keep safe and you keep well. The members of the committee before you are on my right here, Minister Cummins, and on my left, Minister Colin Jordan, and Minister Sandra Husbands. We have online with us Minister Cattle, as well as Dr. Sonia Brown, and MP for St. Philip North. They're part of the committee. You may be exposed to questioning from the staff of the Office of the Auditor General as well, who are represented online here.
Yes,
All
sir.
right?
Okay.
All right, we are very interested in hearing you, to the extent that you can, speak to matters relative to the operations of the Rural Development Commission as it relates to matters raised in query in the Auditor General's report. Has to do with houses which were supposedly to have been constructed under funding from the Urban and Rural Commission, not all of which can be properly accounted for. The award of contracts to persons for the business of construction, and those contracts not properly documented. Also, funds received from the Poverty Eradication Bureau for such works which, having not been used, were not returned to the poverty eradication. Broadly, it is those areas you would have received the document, the summons, which speaks specifically to the areas of reference which we would want to draw to your attention, have you address us on. All right?
Okay.
Do you want to say anything firstly, or do you want to accept or receive questions from members of the commission?
No, I'm ready to receive
All right,
questions.
ministers, Dr. Brown. Anybody wants to go first? Dr. Brown?
Not as yet, Reverend Abley.
I thought you indicated you wanted to go. Minister Jordan, Minister Cattle, Minister Husbands, Minister Cummins? Not as yet. All right, let's pick one of these issues, Mr. Russell Armstrong, and they are under address in pages 56 through 66 of the report of the Auditor General for 2020. And one of those questions or issues related to the matter of the monitoring of construction works. In your position as Director of Rural, would it have been your opinion that the matter of monitoring construction work projects authorized by the Rural Development Commission would have fallen under your purview or the purview of the agency?
Under the purview of the agency, yes?
Okay. The auditor is of the view and concerned over the fact that on page 63, 4.47, there was no follow-up on contracted construction projects. How would you respond to that?
Well, I would say acknowledging that it is the agency's responsibility to monitor the work for which we issue, I think is a bit difficult though, and I would want further explanation from that particular audit committee or crew as to how you can gauge on paper how well a project was monitored. If they're saying information was lacking, that is understood, but how can you gauge on paper whether a project was monitored accurately or not? That is what I'm wondering.
You were privy to the report itself?
I am.
You have a copy?
It is here, yes.
And on page 63, 4.47, let's look specifically to the wording to see if that helps your query. There was no evidence on file that the Bureau's ministries personnel followed up to ensure that houses assigned to be constructed or repaired by UDC or RDC were actually constructed, repaired as specified.
Okay.
Only when the auditors conducted the site visits did the representatives from the ministry discover some houses were not built. The results of the site visit indicate that confirmation that the funds were spent as intended. The results of the site visits indicate that confirmation that the funds were spent as intended was lacking. Follow-up by the ministry is important to ensure that beneficiaries receive the assistance that was moved. This speaks specifically to the role of the Poverty Alleviation Fund. My question to you was, as an agency actually involved in the actual construction work, how do you respond to a statement that the projects were not properly monitored? I interpreted monitored here to suggest that there was nothing to show in evidence by documentation, any reports indicating what was the position with respect to houses intended for construction.
Okay, right. Now, well, this is, my interpretation of it was slightly different, but understanding what was said in 4.47, indeed, there could have been more conclusive information as it related then to the projects afterwards, some of them, yeah? But I would have perused the said files that were provided, being that I was not present at the agency at that time, and I found sufficient information to be able to report to the committee today.
All right, so who would have been in charge of rural at the time? Could you give us that name?
At the
The
time,
director?
in 2007, between 2007 and 2010, it would have been, at one point, Mr. Peter Scott, who is now deceased, and Mr. Burgess. His first name is slipping me right now, and I don't have it before me.
Okay, Mr. Burgess at one stage.
And Mr. Scott at another.
Mr. Scott.
Peter Scott, all right.
Mr. Scott, who is now deceased. Mr. Burgess, who is otherwise unavailable. You said you have reports, therefore, as to what you do or would have done in terms of monitoring those cases which would have
Yeah.
come in under your tenure and would have fallen to your purview. What is the procedure that you adopt in terms of monitoring and reporting on these? And by looking at the files with reference to the era prior to your coming there, what can you share with us from those files?
Well, generally the procedure is that you receive whatever referral from whatever source that you might. In this case, it would have been the Poverty Bureau. And once you receive that information, the general procedure is that it will be assessed technically, the request that is made. It will be assessed technically and socially to find out if the person indeed or parties are privy to the type of help that we offer in terms of socially under the poverty line or whatever the case may be, or if it is a case where that person has been in any way disenfranchised, because you can't always just look at the monetary side of it. You also have to look at disabilities and ability and so forth for the person to take care of themselves.
Yeah, well, that is the front side of the issue. I
Front
don't want to
side.
keep you here overly long. But what about when a project is approved, houses to be repaired or rebuilt for citizen X? That work has, the contract has been awarded.
So start from
How does
contract.
the agency then monitor that under your tenure, your supervision,
Well,
your management?
an
And
offer-
what are the files from the prior period under Mr. Burgess and Mr. Scott? What are those files saying to you as to how those projects were followed through in terms of the construction, actual construction being monitored?
Yeah, so I find it to be quite similar, actually. What we do currently after the contract has been issued is just, as we issue a series of payments, as work progresses, you monitor, you take pictures, you do valuations of the work on site, and you pay according to what has been completed, and you progress that said process until the house is completed. Once the house is completed, however, in the case where you might have received funds from another agency, I found there is not adequate, I would say, follow-up in that regard to report on the funds that were spent, specifically that is received from another agency. In the government vote, it is one thing to have a report saying this is how the funds were spent. But in terms of reporting to poverty or another agency, a sister agency that might have referred a case, there's not that conclusive report to say these are the cases that we received from you and this is what we've done.
So you're saying that once the funding comes through a government-related agency, there's no follow-through as to suggest this is how the funds are being used, allocated, this is what work was done, and nothing like that?
There's a capture of how it was spent, but to report back at the end of the process, no.
So if funds disbursed to you, let's say from poverty eradication fund, let's say $60,000, you use 40, and 20 remain, what would there be any kind of reporting activity in relation to that 20?
Well, I found that generally, most times, and I'm saying most times just to capture what I've seen, the funds have been short. So the projects have costed more than was issued. But that is not reported. That is not reported.
So you're saying most times in your experience,
Yes, that the
projects
funds have been
costing
short.
more
Yeah,
than the funds allocated
correct.
for the project. So what happens in a situation like that?
The funds are then taken from your regular capital disbursements.
Okay, so what happens when the funds are sufficient and they are underutilized?
Well, I've not seen a case like that, but what should happen is that the shortfalls should remain in a separate account. There's a poverty account that is set aside that houses the money that is sent for particular projects, and therefore the surplus should be on that account.
I'm asking those things, Mr. Armstrong, because this committee is not, some people think the Public Accounts Committee is about looking for illegal activity, maybe activity that breaches regulation or law. It's beyond that. It's also trying to see where the systems are deficient and where they can be improved so we can make recommendations to the Parliament that is in fact responding. Yeah? Minister Cummings.
Thank you very much, Chairman. If I can follow on from your line of questioning on page 63, I'd like to ask a question first of the Auditor General, if I might, and if I may, and then on that basis, I'd like to ask a question of the RDC.
The Audit Office is represented for the time being by Cassandra Haywood. She's all ears. Go ahead.
Okay, Ms. Yearwood, I wanted to ask a question on 4.50 on page 64. It makes reference to the fact that under the rules of the financial management audit, there is a requirement that contracts be issued for services above $50,000. It says here that amounts totaling $2.16 million were paid to 4 contractors between the period 1st of April 2012 and the 31st of March 2019. I'd like to get a sense of whether that was RDC or UDC for clarity.
Good evening to everyone. My name is Cassandra Haywood, representing the Barbados Audit Office. To answer your question, Senator Cummings, no, this money has nothing whatsoever to do with RDC. This is for private contractors that were hired by the Poverty Eradication Fund.
Thank you very much. So I just wanted to get a sense on the contracting then from the Poverty Eradication Fund, and I will deal with that when.
Yeah. Mr. Armstrong, the situation with houses, having been approved for construction, money is allocated. The Office of the Auditor General was suggesting that at least in 8 cases, all such 8 houses cannot be found. Was anything in the files that you were able to access speak to that can give us some clarity as to why that would have been the case?
Okay. Well, I have I have 5 names. I think the 8 names was probably both agencies together, but I could be wrong, but I think so, because I requested some names, and I have seen 5 names for that particular reporting period. Now, the
Yeah,
names of
it-
the clients.
The committee is asking that you don't mention in public space like this. This is being carried on media,
Very good.
and you do not need to refer to specifically to the names of those persons.
Right. So, let me just refer to the details then of the particular
Yes,
case.
go
Right.
ahead.
So in one particular instance, money was issued in May 2007, and there was a refusal by the landowner to develop at the current location. An additional lot was identified by a family member in 2008, and then subsequent approval from the regulatory agencies was granted in 2009. Now, the current status of that I have is that the file basically went cold at that point, and the home has not been built, and follow-up is required on that particular.
What do you mean the file went cool?
That was the last correspondence on the file at that time. The approval from
The first time I've
from the
heard that.
regulatory agency.
First time I've heard that expression, or file went cold.
Yeah,
Okay.
cold.
So you have no explanation as to that, or were not able to find
No.
any
No,
explanation?
no,
And your house was not built?
no.
And what happened with the funding, would you be aware?
So I had asked for accounting records of that period, and those records, I'm told at that time, there was no separate account at that time for the property funds. So there was no accurate record to indicate where those funds were reallocated to.
This doesn't happen only you know? You have not had any instances, is it?
No, because we haven't received any money from poverty in quite some time. We received names, but not money. But we still do have a poverty account. Any particular sub-program that is initiated, we open up a sub-account, whether it is just on paper or not, just to represent the funds that are issued through that particular sub-program. And
Anybody else? Yes, Minister Jordan.
Yeah, a question on the poverty, the account that you referred to. You said earlier, but you spoke earlier about the separate accounts and separate accounting for projects coming through poverty alleviation. You said that in your tenure, there's been requests but no funding. The accounts that you're referring to, then I take it to be on paper, so to speak. And the question then is, do you have in your records some of those sub-accounts or accounts which have balances that show funds received from Poverty Alleviation Fund but not yet expended? Do you have that in your accounting records at RDC?
we don't have any funds in the particular account, but we would have a record in recent times of any funds that were received under that sub-program. So I believe before I came, the most recent record we would have is probably like 2017 or so, to indicate the last time funds would have come.
Okay, so RDC has not received funds from Poverty Alleviation Fund since that time?
Certainly not, no,
2017?
no.
Oh, okay.
So if you look on paper, there's an account named Poverty because we still do business with them, but it doesn't carry a balance. Well, or the balance is zero, I should say, on paper. You understand?
So you have not received, sorry, Minister George, just to clarify, you haven't received funds from Poverty Alleviation since 2017?
Not, no.
So monies that you use for your work and your projects is
Yeah.
directly?
So we receive names in a particular period,
Mm.
and what we're able to do is budget for the ones that we will do, budget for those projects
And
that
that
we will
funding
do.
comes directly to you from central?
Yeah, we just submit a capital budget, and it comes from our capital budget for house repairs or house replacements, but not specifically poverty.
Yeah, but the funding in your budget comes from where?
It comes from, government, the
Central
treasury.
government?
Yeah, central government.
Okay. What level of funding would you have in your capital budget, no?
For our capital program, we request, for the last 2-3 years, we've had a capital budget, request, I should say, of about 5 million.
And you have the resources readily available to you to manage those funding for the requisite number of projects?
I would say we would need some additional resources. We do manage, but it is a case of burning the candle from both ends, and at some point in time, it's gonna run out. But
What, in terms of resources, what would you say would be, just generally? some of the-
resources,
That you could do a better job if you had?
oh, well, let me put it as simple as I can. It depends on the number of projects that we're gonna undertake, but to certainly, if we were to get a budget of 5 million, I would need probably in excess of 6 technical officers to be able to monitor projects adequately.
You have how many now?
I have 4 now.
Hmm.
Had some attrition in the last couple of years, and we had a retrenchment exercise.
Hmm. Sorry, Minister Jordan, I cut across you there. That was it? Anybody else? You told us about, go ahead, Minister Husbands.
Sorry, just one question. You said that since 2012, they stopped,
2017.
2017, they stopped
Mhm.
giving money from poverty alleviation. And then I think I read something where it said that you're saying that you get 5 million then to do any projects that are brought to you.
Correct.
Now, one of the reasons identified in the document.
Sorry, we request 5.
Hmm?
We request 5. It's not always 5 that we get, but we request.
Oh, request.
Mhm.
Okay. It said that part of the reason why it was stopped was they were not happy with how the work was being managed.
Mhm.
Since then, has there been any improvement in how projects are executed? Because you're still getting money,
Mhm.
even though it might not be from Poverty Alleviation Fund.
Mhm.
So do the issues and problems still continue, or has there been an improvement to that?
I think generally that, with technology and what's not over the last few years and different management techniques, projects are reasonably monitored, but there are always ebbs and flows. So there are times when you have some peaks, a large quantity of projects, for instance, right now with the whole storm recovery program, influxes that they create a challenge management-wise in terms of the projects. But generally, though, I would say the techniques have improved somewhat and the general strategy, but it always comes then down to numbers and manpower to be able to manage those peak periods. And I certainly think, just for the record, that this is an area where government can seek to employ more temporary resources to manage those peaks as time goes on.
In some cases, the administrative end was not always up to mark in terms of keeping reports, putting out contracts, that type of thing. Where is RDC know in relation to the administrative and accounting function and being able to meet the requirements that the Auditor General and the government would expect?
I think in terms of the accounting, we're okay. That is a matter of vigilance and consistency. And once that's in place, records are quite forthcoming. The administrative part within the technical department has also been enhanced with some software. So we've been able to accurately represent what we have in terms of funds expended and so forth quite accurately, and what we're doing. Now, in terms of the administration that would be lacking, that is not really from a record keeping perspective, but more so from an operational perspective and being absolutely efficient in what we do on the ground, construction works and the associated ancillary works, electricity and water connections and tracking those things. Administratively, there's still room for improvement in those areas.
Okay. And the adherence to the rules that anything over $50,000 should go to tender. Have you all been able to improve on that? Because that was identified as a challenge.
Our practice is actually, 3 competitive bids in accordance with the rules, and we still do employ that. What we've done in recent times as well is that we've also introduced our own bid. So it's an internal costing, bill of quantities, to make sure that, because if 3 people get together and decide we can put the bid at this, we still need to know that the government's funds are being expended in the way they should. So we do our own personal costings inside as well. It's just another safety measure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. Minister Cattle? Minister Jordan, sorry.
On the matter of supervision and checking on projects,
Minister Husband, turn off the
What-
microphone. Minister Husband's good. Turn off the microphone.
I sense that, based on what, on your response just now, you indicated that you do BQs and so you can make comparisons. So that would be the work, I believe, of quantity surveyors. What mechanism do you have in place to check on projects, to monitor projects, to make sure that but first of all, that people are on target in terms of time, and that the amounts that contractors are claiming are really represent the amount of work done? What kind of systems do you have in place now that may not have been in place in the past?
Well, now we do our valuations of a standard valuing system. Having an initial costing now and accurate breakdown of that costing allows you to better gauge where a person is at in terms of what they've spent, and therefore account for the funds that you've issued. So what I would say is, in this period, I think the costing of the officer and the level of detail is probably all that has changed. So you're better able to gauge where a person is at. So instead of just saying foundation, roof, walls, and what's not, you may have some other literature in between there that is able then to inform where a person is at if he hasn't reached a particular target. And it just allows you a better gauge of what he spent and what you can issue.
In terms of, that sounds like target in terms of funds.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a monitoring of targets in terms of time? And the reason why I'm asking that is because sometimes people say that things take long in government. So my question is, on the matter of timelines, you know that if you issue a contract, the house is supposed to be repaired within 6 weeks, built within 3 months, as the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
What happens in terms of monitoring of timeline, if anything?
Right. So in terms of the monitoring timeline, I would say that we have a gauge. We accurately represent what is the start date, what is the proposed end date. But in terms of a timeline, we don't monitor that with a specific tool as such. Let me tell you why. Now, we all live in Barbados. We all hear things. People in here might have heard of the rural development and what we do, and you might be hearing things. No. The fact is that we have a responsibility not only with our clients, but generally with the contractors that work for us in terms of helping the society, in terms of unemployment and so forth. So there are always going to be different grades of contractors that we employ. When you find a contractor who you've employed that needs a little bit more hand-holding than another, this is where you get a lot of variance. You have to monitor him more regularly. You have to be able to advise and give more technical input. So that is where I would say we have a challenge at this point. If you get too many of those contractors, it completely stretches out the resources that you have. You have to have more frequent and more vigorous monitoring, and that is where you'll find the fall down. So in terms of time, I'm saying that it depends on the level of contractor you have, and you have to give allowances, all right? We just can't put all the money in one person's hand. Certainly, you're going to track their progress, and you should certainly provide a report on that contractor. But in many cases, it's my personal belief that you need to educate and help these guys. You need to bring them up to a level. So I don't just want to throw them out because they didn't accurately perform, right? So if it's a time-sensitive project, as most are with particular clients that we have, you really need to be on top of it, and you need to know the horse for the course. But a decent contractor so you can stick to your timelines. So managing timelines, that's how we do it. Try to put the right horse for the right course and manage it in that way.
Dr. Brown?
Thank you, Chair. Listening to the gentleman, I forget your name, sir, I apologize.
Armstrong.
The question I have for you is what benchmarks do you all use to hire contractors? Because I'm noticing now that I'm here that a lot of people have been registering as contractors, and you know how the political world goes. Sometimes they're recommended by MPs. Do y'all check to see their backgrounds? I try to do that due diligence when I'm recommending somebody, but I'm noticing even from way back in the last administration that some contractors were hired with not much of a background, and then they fell short of producing in a timely fashion, because I think time is still a matter. Right now I have, and it's not necessarily under you, but as an example, where I've waited almost a year for a 3-bedroom wooden house to be finished. How do you vet the contractors? What benchmarks do you use?
In terms of vetting, it is quite difficult in the absence of a contractor's society to be able to do that. Usually the process is to ask for references of work that the particular contractor has done. That is not done in all cases in our agency, though. If we receive, I mean, over the years, we would have been exposed to quite a bit of contractors. Clearly, over 500 or so we've had registered, and that is meaningful over the time. And we generally consult between agencies. Are you familiar with this person? What kind of work? So in terms of UDC, RDC, sometimes even NHC, to know what kind of work done. So there's an interagency informal collaboration when we get a recommendation. Outside of that, if you get a new contractor, we sometimes do the vetting ourselves by the level of the job that we issue. So you issue something small, start small, monitor the contractor closely, see what they can do, see how they have performed, and you go from there. What we don't have is a contractor grading system, and it's something that both RDC and UDC are trying to put in place right now, and that would help certainly as we progress. So I want to note that and acknowledge that your point with reference to the 3-bedroom house is one that is familiar to the agency and we know is going on. But let me say too that we have a responsibility to monitor that work, and I can't make excuses. If it is taking a year, it should not take a year. Barring any external interference, we should make adequate recommendations based on our contractual period where that project is concerned. I don't mean to sound very utopian, but the fact of the matter is that is what should take place. So it's unfortunate that these situations arise, but that is what should take place.
Chair, may I go on a bit longer?
Yeah, sure.
With respect to starting the homes, and I always reference situations that I know. I have had cases where the social worker or workers went in, written letters from my professional point of view, and yet it's taken extremely long to get to what I consider to be urgent cases. And the last question I have, if you remember that one, the last question I have is the recourse that the client has with respect to bad work being done. The fact that this is housing though, but just to draw as a reference, the houses that I have right now in parish land, the residents are now complaining about the work being that they found there, but after complaining, got no recourse. And then I'm told that the warranty would have expired. What recourse do these residents have, or would-be residents have, in terms of work that was badly done and so on? And how effective is that with respect to responding to them? That's the last question.
Well, I mean, the last question, yes, it specifically relates to the National Housing Corporation. But with reference to rural development, if we take on a project, let's start with a repair, because a repair is a repair. It remains your property, and we don't have any interest in it after that. Now, we would be duty bound to ensure that the work that was done is actually work of a particular quality. If it so happened that something was defective in that work, it's still going to end up back at us, and we would have to go in and rectify it, because most times the client, it is not a business transaction, although there's a level of business involved, but there's no exchange of money between the client and RDC. We are duty bound as a social agency to represent the person and make sure that they're adequately housed and they get a good quality for what they have requested. So if that is the case, there may be isolated incidents where it may not be so, but we would be duty bound to go back and rectify the problem. That is a repair. In terms of a new house, the property, in terms of our agreement, there's a 10-year agreement that should exist where we maintain an interest in the property. We insure the property until the time has passed, at which point in time we release our interest in the property, and the client is then expected to more actively engage in the maintenance of the property after that. So during that time, again, if something takes place, some defective work, we are usually the agency that would have to go in and rectify. Unfortunately, you don't really want to be using government's resources and returning to that property in such a short time frame. So you should really put in the due diligence in the first instance to make sure that you're not returning to that property in a short space of time, because there are other clients that need servicing as well. But if it does happen, well, it is our policy to go back and rectify whatever the issue was that would have taken place afterwards.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Mr. Armstrong, just a couple more queries from me. You started to give us some information relative to a few instances around these houses. You mentioned house number one, or situation number one. You didn't get beyond that.
Right. So let me just say, of the 5 homes that I have here, None of them were built, indeed. So let me confirm that firstly. In the first instance, I said follow-up is required. One client is currently being assisted, but indeed, that would have been since 2009 that that client was waiting. In two instances, the client had been deceased and the money was transferred to another client. That's on file. That's captured. And the last instance,
And in the instance of the other client, that project was completed?
yes, that where the money was transferred, yes. And in the last instance, town planning has refused to the building of that particular property because it was in a zone 1 area. But again, that money, that's where the file stops. So I don't see a redirecting of those funds to another client.
Can we get that document to which you're referring there?
Sure,
Any other documents that you may have referred to?
sure.
Yeah, just two more queries from myself, and then if nobody else has a question, we'll let you have your leave. How do you respond to the following? This is on page 66 of the report of the Auditor General's Office. Monies disbursed to UDC and RDC for houses that were not constructed should be recovered. How do you respond to that?
Well, in terms of the recovery of the money, I don't know if it's kind of like a redundant process in my mind.
I'm not hearing you. Don't know if,
Sorry, I don't know if it's like a redundant process or what in my mind I'm thinking, but it would be returning to government, yeah? Understood? But we are currently in a program where we are short of funds to assist the level of, to give the level of assistance that's required of us. I certainly do not advocate misappropriation of government funds, but in a case like this, to reimburse the Treasury, central government at this point in time, I don't know how practical it is, but I think certainly the point is noted about the misappropriation of the funds and the reporting, but I don't know how practical this is
I
right now.
don't know that the word misappropriation was used, not suggested by me. I just wanted to hear how you, as the Director of Rural, would respond to a statement like that money is dispersed for houses not used, and houses not constructed should be recovered. And I hear you to be saying you don't think that it is serving the good interests of the people of Barbados and taxpayers to have the money. But would you not agree, if you were to state further, that it would be good to have proper documentation, $60,000 given for house X, not used, it is on account XYZ, and we are considering using it for project Y. You think something like that should be in place, so poverty alleviation, or whoever the source of the funding knows, and that a proper accounting is available to us. Would you not?
Yeah, certainly. I would agree that based on the funds that we have not accounted for, that we should be able to show that they're being utilized to the good of intended persons. Yes, I think so.
Okay, the other thing is, and we go to Minister Cattle after this, it is being proposed that the ministry investigates the reasons why the houses were not constructed and determine the way forward in assisting the intended beneficiary.
Well, I think that that's a valid point, and I think that RDC should do that due diligence, which we've started the process, and adequately report to poverty on those particular clients.
All right, Minister Cattle.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose I was coming in, I raised my hand when you were still speaking. I suppose I was coming in on the last point that you made, not just with reference to the monies that are the subject of this report, but in general, because I have to confess that I am not encouraged by Mr. Armstrong's response to the notion that if funds are dispersed for a certain purpose and not used for that purpose, because the RDC is often arguably underfunded or cash-strapped, that would justify not properly accounting for the funds or not having them returned. I think that general, I'm not the accountant here, I'm an economist, and the two are very, very different. But I think that general accounting principle and project management would tell you that if you have received resources for a particular purpose and that purpose is not met, there must be some reconciliation. So I don't think that we are in a position where we can say that, well, it hasn't been used for that, but the organization always needs resources anyway. So what's the point of returning them? I suppose, Chair, that my question would be the same as yours, which is, or similar to yours, which is to ask Mr. Armstrong what will be put in place as a general principle of governance by the RDC to make sure that any resources that are not used for the intended purpose, if it is proposed that they be used for another purpose, what is the process by which that is done and documented?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. I think that the last comment before you came in is where I would lean to in my response. Now, if funds were allocated and they were not used for the purpose, as in particular, if they were allocated from another agency, that certainly we should indicate that this is the balance that we have and we intend to use these funds to assist such and such and such. And I think that in all cases, that's what should take place. If funds are issued, we establish, you keep your separate accounts for that particular sub-program. When your accounts balance and you have either a positive or a negative balance, it should be reported. And in the case where there's a positive balance, meaning that there's a surplus, you should indicate, well, based on our requirements, this is the suggested use of these funds. And in a case where it is in the negative, in that you've expended more than you were given, you report accordingly and indicate where the funds came from and why they would need to be replenished. So I am agreeing with you on the point that there should be relevant follow-up and indication of what would be done with the funds. So it's not my intention to say that funds should just remain with us because we are short, but certainly that the funds should remain with us with a particular purpose and particular documentation as to how they would be utilized.
Just one follow-up, Chair. Mr. Armstrong, your use of the word should is causing me some concern. What obtains now?
What obtains now is what I said, and that's the process that obtains now. And the reason why I use should is that in all cases, we will do our due diligence to ensure that that's what happens. But I certainly, that would be my intent, and that's why I use the word should.
Are you suggesting that there are instances where it does not happen?
No, I'm suggesting that there may be instances where it may not happen for some reason or other, but to date, no.
So that has never happened?
Well, certainly not under my tenure.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and I know, Mr. Armstrong, you can't speak for urban, but I thought I heard you indicated that you are doing this and urban should follow suit.
No, I don't. Should follow suit in terms of what I'm doing now?
You should do what y'all are doing.
Well, you are correct in the first statement. I can't speak for urban. I referred to the contractor grading and so forth and saying that we are both trying to do that.
Okay.
But
Okay. Any further question? Anyone online? Dr. Brown, Minister Cattle, in-house, Minister Husbands, Jordan, comments? No one? Let me thank you, Mr. Armstrong, for coming and for sharing with us. we need to have the copies of the documentation to which you referred.
Right.
Yeah?
Now, should I,
Parliamentary staff here will
Okay,
will
fantastic.
help to facilitate that. Can we take a couple of minutes break so that we can do the necessary sanitizing before we call in Mr. Pollard?
provided to the permanent secretary.